Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Kacey Rohl, an actor you might know from shows like Hannibal, Wayward Pines, Arrow, Fortunate Son, and The Magicians, or from the Now Screen Stars package we put together earlier this year. And if you've seen her performance in Calvin Thomas and Yona Lewis's nail-biting character study White Lie, you know why. Kacey picked All That Jazz, Bob Fosse's 1979 film about an aging choreographer/filmmaker who has far too many balls in the air. He's juggling projects, relationships, and a daughter, all while trying to stay ahead of a health crisis that he can't stay ahead of forever. Featuring an amazing turn by Roy Scheider as Fosse's avatar, Joe Gideon, supported by fully engaged work from Anne Reinking, Leland Palmer, Erzsébet Foldy, Ben Vereen, and more, it's an unforgettable work of clear-eyed autobiography that's also as glitzy and obsessed with spectacle as anything else Fosse ever made. Except it isn't like anything else Fosse ever made. You'll understand. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I think this was the first film I came across. So when I was in high school, I danced, and our dance teacher was like, we're going to do a Fosse routine. And I was like, what's that? Great. I'd been used to doing, like contemporary and like some jazz and things like that. And she introduced us to this style of choreography, and I was like, this is wackadoo. This is like some maverick just like being like, yeah, okay, we could do it that way, or we could do it this way and make it funny for once in our lives, not take everything so seriously.
Yeah.
And so I went on this hunt for everything to do with him, and then, ended up watching all of the films he made, and then came upon this and was like just fascinated by it, and his approach to that kind of like introspection and like owning of who he was, and that all combined with operating inside the box but outside of the box was very fascinating to me. So I think that kind of sums it up.
Yeah. With formative experiences like this, when somebody stumbles across a new language, and I always wonder if your connection to the film emerges because you're ready for it at that exact moment, or because you're not ready for it and you try the attempt to understand it pulls you in even closer. I'm thinking I was 11 when it came out. I missed it completely theatrically, obviously, but I caught up to it on videotape too soon, I think. Like I didn't have any understanding of dance, so I didn't understand what was so special about Fosse. And then to see, like just the erotica sequence alone, which is a terrible,
so
I know it's a terrible pun, but somehow the earnestness of the way he presents it makes sense when you're watching it. But to watch that and think, am I supposed to be on his side? Like, is this, because it's presented as everyone else in the film rejecting it, but Fosse's making the movie, so he's theoretically, this is not going too far. He thinks, is he trying to show us that they're not ready for it? Is he trying to show us that Gideon doesn't know what he's doing and he's gone too far? What is the point of the scene? And then watching it again 10 years later and 15 years later and 20 years later, I still don't know, which is so fascinating to me. Like, I don't know if Fosse has a clear perspective on that scene. It is just so strange and specific and 1979-y, and this kind of movie really only happened in that window of time, and I don't know that there is anything else like All That Jazz specifically. So I'm really glad you chose it. But so when you would have seen it in like the late 2000s, maybe?
Yeah, that's probably about then. Yeah, and I think it's interesting you talk about being ready for it or not, and I think parts of it blew my brain wide open, and then other parts of it felt so familiar. Like, I have a parent who works in film and a parent who works in theater. And so, like, seeing those two worlds brought together felt super familiar, and like I could slip inside of it and understood a lot of it, and the jokes that were coming up. Like, my mom doesn't work in musical theater, but when he presents that song, I can't remember but the song is presented, and the Fosse character Gideon is just sort of like trying to bear it, and the Gwen Verdon proxy is sort of like making fun of it to him. I was like, oh yeah, we've all sat in those rooms.
Yeah, and the film stuff too is I wouldn't say he dabbled, but he only made 5 features, I think.
Yeah.
And each one of them is so distinctive and so strange, and just even watching it's ultimately Ramona Clef about the making of Lenny, which only shows us the worst scenes of Lenny, right? Like I really like Lenny, but the stand-up scenes are pretty flat. They're just performance. They're not as interesting visually as the rest of the movie. And I found it fascinating that that's what he chooses to show us in the context of All That Jazz, is the stand-up Cliff Gorman, who is not he played Lenny Bruce on stage apparently, but he's not a particularly convincing screen actor in that scene. I think it's intentional, but again, why? What is he saying? What's he trying to tell me about how he feels about his own work? It
feels to me, when I was, sorry to interrupt you, I was thinking about rewatching it. I was like, this is a man who's like sitting, this like man as maker, man as artist, sitting with his failures, like having dinner with his failures, and really trying to make sense of them and own them in a way. And like, for me, like, it's interesting that you brought up the erotica scene, the "Come Fly With Us," whatever. But to me, that was like the whole container is like, here's my meditation on failure, punctuated by bits of greatness that I'm just going to own and be bold about. Like erotica, I was like, he loves this piece. I think he's proud of this piece, but it's bookended by being like, I'm a piece of shit, basically. Yeah,
no, it is. It's really fascinating. Gideon is Joe Gideon is our focal character. He's the representative of the filmmaker. He's all of these things, but I think I like him because he's played by Roy Scheider. And if I saw Bob Fosse playing Joe Gideon, I probably wouldn't connect with him as much. And that too is really a conscious and clever choice. But it's such a wild swing. Like, it's such a... Nothing else he'd made prepares you for this thing. I really wish I'd been able to see it in 1980 with everybody else and just, and experience it with an audience. I mean, it won the Palme d'Or. 1979. I always fight it in my head because my brain tells me Apocalypse Now won the Palme d'Or that year, and that was 79, but it wasn't. But it was all that jazz. But that's even weirder that year produced both of those films, and they're so uniquely, specifically those things.
Yeah, I can see like shades of them in each other, like
yeah.
In Apocalypse Now, when the Playboy bunnies show up, like that to me sort of still fits within the All That Jazz universe,
Yeah, and the monomaniacal characters, like Colonel Kilgore would work perfectly well in All That Jazz.
Totally.
He'd be weird, but yeah, there was just this place where studios were able to release, Kramer versus Kramer, it was that year too, and there's all this other stuff where these deeply personal, really small projects, or massive, deeply personal, really small projects, because All That Jazz, for all of its excess, and it's the film that is drenched in cocaine and flop sweat and cigarettes, it's really small. It's about a guy afraid he'll lose his family. Like, ultimately the thing that, sorry, we're going to jump all over. You can't really... I hope that people listening to this episode have already seen it, because there's no way to discuss it without discussing the way it ends. But, the thing ends with a 12-minute disco nightmare fantasia in which, like, it all gets pierced when you hear the little girl's voice just say, "Don't go," and it's just like the whole thing collapses. I just, I watched it again, and I was so affected by that. I know it's there. I've seen the movie half a dozen times, but this time it just really, it's like, oh, that's what this is all about. This whole thing is about how he's afraid he won't make it. And he used his own footage of his own heart surgery. You know about that, right? Because that's the weirdest part of this.
Is that real?
Yeah,
okay, I was like, how did he get that?
Yeah, it's him. It's his own open heart surgery.
That's blowing my mind.
I know.
That's wild.
Yeah. It's how he got the release, I assume. But it's just like, it's how do you have, and it's in the film, it's throughout the film, but how do you have the presence of mind to set that up with the expectation that you'll be able to use it, that you'll survive to use it? It's the ego of it is phenomenal. And of course, but knowing Fosse's work, it's like, well, of course he would try to do it because he'd know it would make for a great story. Like there's that theatricality in the narrative and the way that the story is told. It's just so compelling, and I guess that's part of the charm too, right? You're being carried along by this great storyteller, which all of a sudden pulls the rug out from under you. But oh wow, yeah, no, it's just it's so busy, and there are so many balls in the air, and there's that weird little Hollywood satire with the cheap shots through John Lithgow's character at the wrong kind of auteur. It's just so much fun.
Yeah, it's so true. And I found too, like, witnessing, like, John Lithgow's a great example, and the people that I didn't even clock were in it when I first watched it, like Wallace Shawn and Jessica Lange. I didn't even have, Jessica Lange as Death is perfect. The angel of death.
Yeah. She's so, and she's shot through all these filters and veils, and it just, it's that weird instinctive thing where you just lean in to get a better look at her, even though you know that the film, like the screen, isn't going to yield anything further.
Yeah. But that's, it was such an interesting way to meet, like, that whole thread of the movie was like that, like, death is the ultimate lay for him. Like, that's the ultimate get. And the fact that she's this, like, alluring, like, we're all brought into this thing of, like, oh yeah, death feels kind of like, death is sort of sexy, like, yeah, I want to get in there. It's just very interesting to me that she's always at a distance, but he walks with her, like she's right there. And I wonder if for him that, like, provided a sense of freedom for him, like knowing where death was in the room all the time, that he could just, like, not run from it. He was like, yeah, she's right over there. Yeah. I'm just gonna do whatever I want. She'll take me whenever she wants.
That's true. I mean, if it's not a framing, if it's not flashbacks, but actually a linear time, if he's just checking in with her every now and then while he tries to get one more thing done, that's even more appropriate for the workaholic mode, right? Like, totally. He's actually putting her off here and there. But you don't get the sense that there's bargaining, right? Like, you're right, he's checking in with her. Just, what's up? Still got time. Okay, cool.
Totally. Yeah. You haven't become menacing yet. Okay, got it.
Yeah. And she is always there, because he's haunted by his own mortality. I mean, we know he knows he has a bad heart, and he's racing whatever it is. The little opening montage with the Visine and the Benzedrine and whatever else it is that gets him out the door in the morning. And the sense of his life as performance that, feels absolutely true to whoever Bob Fosse had to be to do what he did, right? Because when you're that specific a talent, I guess you have to perform yourself all the time to get people on board, to make people feel comfortable, to get them to do whatever it is you want them to do. And that then we see how the manipulation extends to his family, and how the Criterion disc has an essay in there that points out that the one time he isn't working is when he's playing with his daughter. Everything else is work. And it's like, yeah, I get that. And you see the strain of it. You can see it in that performance in Scheider. Yeah,
for sure. Well, it's like, I feel like he nailed, like, Fosse as a director nailed this, like, this maker whose work is inherently so affected. Like, Fosse's style is so affected.
Yeah.
But the performances within this crazy container are pretty grounded and pretty honest, and I don't know, representing that like the flipping of the switch from, like, performing self to being self to performing art to making art to, it's a fascinating thing to me. All of the hats, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were talking about this over email before the episode, before you picked your movie, and you gave me a list of titles, and they're all in some way about public performance or persona performance, which, like, this is just the most meta of them, but also the one the whole thing depends on performance and direction and performance of the direction and everything else. It's a really interesting thread to pull on.
I think it just fascinates me as a human being, like, in the world we live in now, that so much of what we do is so inherently performative, whether we clock it or not. And, like, of course, like, we're always performing to some extent with, like, other people in the world, but social media and all that stuff. And
Sure.
yeah, it's a fascinating bit of new human psyche to roll around.
Yeah, and I wonder how well we've evolved to deal with it yet, like, or if we even have, because some people are clearly worse at it than others and insist on doing it anyway.
Yes. I don't think we've caught up. I think our brains are like, huh? They're just sort of like tap dancing on ice that's about to break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? We all know inherently, we all know what trying too hard looks like. And in social media, there's neediness. Now we call it thirst. But, you know, what was it for Fosse? What would it have been for him? It's the people who pretend to get it but don't get it, I think. Those seem like the most loathsome people in Joe Gideon's world. The ones who say they're on board and then back away from his genius.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's the line? I wonder if Kubrick ever gets depressed. Where it's just like...
It's so funny to think, too, about... Oh, my gosh. Yeah. The whole reality of the actual world that this movie came out into, and Kubrick, and... Yeah.
Yeah.
I do often... Yeah, like, what is it to be a genius? And that specific type of ego that's like, I think I am a genius.
Yeah.
But I also think I'm a trash human. That, egomaniac with low self-esteem thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I can absolutely identify with the imposter syndrome. I don't know if I come along to the genius. Like, the only people I've met who are, I think, legitimate geniuses are the ones who are least comfortable with the term, because on some level, if you define it, it'll go away. I think that's the fear. That's like Soderbergh, maybe, is somebody who is like, he's probably the smartest person I've ever met. And he's aware that everyone thinks that. So he tries not to be, which is kind of fascinating. I think it's made him a more emotional, intuitive director as it goes along. But, he can be cold and cerebral and just shut off everything else to make his movie. It's how he can work so fast. It's how he can get the performances he gets. But at the same time, when you see him in a human environment, he has this thing where he just sort of preemptively cuts the tension, because he's learned that people expect he's going to be some cold, weird genius in a corner, and he's not. He's got a sense of humor and he's relaxed, but he's just one of those things where it's like, oh no, you're like trying to hide your superpower, and it doesn't read as phony, but you can kind of see the effort sometime of him just trying to dial it down a little. I get the feeling Fosse never dialed it down, is my point.
Yeah, I don't know that he did either. I think he used other people's perceptions of him as best he could for whatever he felt he needed,
Yeah, that sounds about right. And the public persona being the private persona, being the persona he uses in the movie. And then that weird, I hate this phrase, but it's the only one that works, the only one that applies, the knock-on effect of popular culture then deciding that Roy Scheider was Bob Fosse. Like, that version of him is the real person. And then Sam Rockwell kind of finding a way to integrate both of those in Fosse Verdon, where, that show is beholden to all that jazz in a way that I don't think it was comfortable with, but that it found a way to use. It's just so fascinating that he's, like, with this movie, 30 years before that show, Bob Fosse is directing another television show down the line. It's just, nobody even knew it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I think, too, like, I don't know, I had the experience, I watched Fosse Verdon, and even with my deep love of Fosse and any learning that I'd done, I just totally spaced on the Gwen of it all.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, having that acknowledged, and now going back and watching all that jazz holding that knowledge, it just had a different ring entirely.
Yeah, I mean,
cool.
And he doesn't let himself off the hook, right? Like, it's not a confessional exactly, but it is a mature look at that relationship. And
and I think he's like, I don't think he's ever going to be the guy, or would have ever been the guy to go to the, morality police and be like, please forgive me for I have sinned, like, I don't think that's the guy he was, but he was like, here's an honest presentation of my shit. I am not an ethical non-monogamist. I fucked around.
Yeah.
But he owns it, and yeah.
Yeah, and they never left each other's lives, which is so strange and touching, right? Especially in light of this movie and the way that it plays on their relationship. It's like she was even clearly complicit's the wrong word. What was it? She approves of this. Like she was okay with this movie because they were still together afterwards.
Yeah.
In a way. And yeah.
I don't know, that whole love story, because I do think it's a love story, is so fascinating to me that like they tried the married thing and that's not what their relationship was meant to be, because they couldn't hold that space for each other, but they could still collaborate, and even in the making of this film, you know, that Anne Reinking was, you know, his partner during the making of all of this, and that there were other women throughout the cast who he'd had affairs with, or trysts, or experiences, or whatever you want to call it, you know?
It was the 70s. There were all kinds of words for it.
Yeah, there was, yeah.
But yeah, there's an open-heartedness to it, like a big-heartedness, not an open-heartedness, but and a literal open-heartedness. Yeah, and it's like, how many other filmmakers can you say actually showed you their heart? And he doesn't do it in any. It's not manipulative when he does it. Like, I think that's what's so fascinating about it. He's never, ever making excuses for Joe Gideon, or for himself, right? Like, he's just presenting it. It's almost like a case study of this sort of mania.
And he's not looking for any sort of approval, you know. Like I remember when I first watched it, and even now in some respects, like there are many parts of Joe Gideon that like bump up against my personal politic, that I should be like, I don't know if I really want to be in a room with this guy, or like I don't really, you know. But I'm still like Team Joe. I'm still like really ready to watch him do his thing and feel for him and love him. I'm like, because I think it's such a good representation of staying in the grapple, like wrestling with the good of you and the bad of you, or even outside of that binary, like what it is to be a human being.
Yeah.
And the death comes for us all.
Sure. And maybe that's why it's okay that Joe is such a... I hesitate to say this is an early study of toxic masculinity. I think it's more, it thinks it's about a difficult person, right? Like that's what it would have been called back then. Like Joe's not an anti-hero in the way that we now understand it. He is the hero of his own story. Because the hero of the story is telling it. But what it gets is, I think it's because it doesn't let him off the hook. Like, he doesn't get to live to see the successes. You know, it's framed as acceptance, like explicitly within the other framing device of the film, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But his acceptance, that big splashy production number, he's going out on his own terms, but then we see the body. Like, we know that's not what's really happening. We know it's a fantasy that he's built for himself to get out on a high. And it's just the idea that Fosse knows it, like he knows this movie is about his own delusions. That's so compelling and kind of sad. And, you know, even if he's just pretending to be that self-aware, he sells it to me. Like, I bought it. I remember watching it the first time through and just thinking, this is literature. In a really strange cinematic, like unapologetically theatrical way. It's like I can't even come up with the appropriate. I'm thinking of just this amalgamation of all these influences of his, but there are no influences. It's him. Like, he's only drawing on his own stuff, and then you see, you know, to see something like the movie version of Chicago, or even 9, where Rob Marshall's just kind of biting the act and doing the same, like, what would Bob Fosse do? And you realize that only Bob Fosse knew what to do. Right? Like Cabaret and Lenny and even Sweet Charity, they're so precise in what they want to do. They're not really the same movie in any way. Maybe some lighting choices is the closest thing there was. You know, he liked spotlights, but I mean, in more ways than one, obviously. But yeah, it's just when you get to this, and it's like he only made 3 other features. He'd only done it in the space of a decade. How the hell did he get this good and know what to do in ways that no one had ever done it before? I'm still in awe of it, and it's been, it's a 40-year-old movie. It doesn't feel dated at all. It feels like a time capsule. Like the best period pieces don't date because they like, unless there's something from the late 80s or early 90s where the hair is a giveaway, where it's like, they didn't have that kind of product in 1865. Come on, who are you kidding, Ewan McGregor? But it's this doesn't do that either. This feels like it was just shot like a camera followed around a bunch of people and through their lives, and then also somehow got to shoot the afterlife, the underworld, whatever you want to call it. It's just so weird. And then there's the point where I finally caught it, the electric guitar riff at the end of Bye Bye Life, that really weird pulsing, pumping bass line. It's from Billy Joel's song. It's from Captain Jack. And I don't know that Fosse knows that. Like, it's just there.
Oh man, it's so good. That whole sequence is amazing. And I think too that he was able to like I don't know, hold his entire world. Like, it almost feels like he made it after he died, because he's holding his whole world so well. And I don't know, I don't know. I just keep thinking about Roy too and his performance, and because that lends so much. Like, I was reading the other day that Warren Beatty was considered.
I heard about that too.
And that would have been like a whole different, like, I don't think I just have a word. I'm like, no thanks, Warren. Like that kind of, the particular Warren Beatty ego would have been like such a different spice.
Yeah, I don't think they would have been able to work together. I mean, just like, can you believe? I cannot believe Warren Beatty would be willing to subsume himself to another ego of that on that level. And I think also, having just watched a bunch of Beatty stuff fairly recently, I don't know that he could have done it. I don't know that he's the right character for that. I think maybe it was pitched to him as an extension of Shampoo, where like, you're not a nice guy but you think you are. But yeah, I don't think he would have been able to do it.
I just think like he could. I don't know. I mean, no, I don't want to crap on Beatty too much, but like, I don't know that he, like, his ego was so, like, rock hard. Even, like, watching Shampoo, I was like, I don't think you can get underneath of that. There's no way in through that. So asking him to be like, yeah, here's this thing about me that is my entire thing that I'm now going to let you behind. This carefully constructed facade of sexy. You're going to, like, that's a huge ask. And I don't know if he,
I wonder.
He would have been willing.
Yeah, I think like he was also in that stage where he was an unquestionable hero in his own work, like Reds and Heaven Can Wait, where he's sort of this innocent dupe of fate in both of them, right guy, right time sort of stories. That's not who Joe Gideon is. Like, Joe Gideon he's an unapologetic user of people, of substances, of art. He inserts himself into the world or upon the world, I guess. And while, that is kind of a setup for a joke about Warren Beatty inserting himself into all sorts of things. But it was there. I couldn't not do it. But
I'm so glad you did.
But yeah, that's not what this movie's about. Like, it's really not about humility or surrendering your image to someone else. Like, I wish I'd gotten the chance to interview Roy Scheider even once. There's so many things I would have talked to him about, but this and Jaws would have been the two, obviously. I mean, there are leading man performances that don't look like leading man performances, right? Like Quint is a big, larger than life character in Jaws, but Brody's the one we follow because we identify with him because he knows he doesn't belong and we feel the same way. And in this, it's about watching that same actor 4 years later take control of every shot, of every moment, and just even in the scenes where he's asking people what they think, he doesn't really care. He's telling them what he wants them to say. It's with his posture, with his eyes, with that stupid hat. I mean, it's an incredible performance. Yeah,
I think about the scene with, oh my god, I can't divorce her from the Wen version of it all. Remind me, do you remember her name in the movie?
Leland Palmer?
Yes.
No. Yeah.
Okay. But the
Not
scene
ranking,
where, where she's rehearsing and he comes in and he kind of uses her like a mirror.
Yeah.
Like he asks her all of these questions, but it's almost like, I mean, the container that she's rehearsing in front of a mirror and observing herself. He comes in and then figures out what he needs to figure out on her.
Yeah.
And she's just sort of left like, he's gonna drive me nuts. But he gets what he needs, you know, like he has those people he uses as studio mirrors, you know, and doesn't acknowledge them or credit them, but
yeah, and it's accepted that this isn't the first time this has happened, right? Like this is a rehearsed thing between them. This has gone on before, and she knows what he wants, and she's not even she's confused but not annoyed because it's an emotion she's familiar with.
And she knows the game, right? Like she continues doing her own thing in it. She's like, you know,
that's true.
I've stopped my world for this man before to help him figure out whatever issue he's having, but you know, I'm going to keep doing my thing, and I have the skills now to be like, yeah, you know what you want already. I'm just going to keep, you know, ronde-jambing or whatever. Yeah. And there's that practiced physicality of all of them. Like, they're all really dancers. They're all really capable of movement. I didn't think Scheider had much experience, but he's obviously, like, his physique is shaped for a dancer. He looks like someone who could dance, even if he maybe didn't. But, yeah, it's just that whole world looks, there's not a false note. All the pieces are right. The cigarette smoke looks right. That glossy lens thing that was happening in 1979 is exactly right for this. Like if you shoot it clean, it wouldn't feel right. It would feel artificial. Totally. Yeah. It's super. I mean, even I was reading too that apparently the whole opening where he's doing, you know, like the chorus line sort of
the audition
sequence, like that. I don't even know if it was a real thing or whatever, but apparently he had like a little bug in his ear, and Fosse was feeding him things that he could say and, you know, gestures he could make that would sort of sell it a bit more. And I watched that and I'm like, yep, there you go. There's a guy running the session, like for sure. Yeah.
I can believe it. It also just felt like a casual reference to a chorus line as something that he would have directed better. Like it's just, you know, this is how I would have handled it. This is what I would have done. And I don't know if is that talent and ego? Is that only ego? Is that the point where talent becomes ego, or vice versa? It's like somebody who knows himself and can't help himself. That's what this feels like. Yeah,
100%. And like I don't know. The interesting thing about like the references he chooses to make and when he's being self-referential, or like, you know, there's a whole thing when I think her name is Victoria, the dancer comes over to his apartment, and she basically does a bit of chorus line.
Right.
She like stands and addresses him and then talks about her nose and how she needs to get a nose job, which is just like ripped from Dance 10 Looks 3, you know? So,
yeah.
It's interesting.
He must have known. He must have known, and was he taunting someone about it? Was it like an in-joke that he just fell in love with that he couldn't get rid of?
He must have been. Also, his daughter went on to be in it, right? So.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Again, he was directing from beyond the grave. He's just setting things in motion. He's
always been a spirit. Maybe Fosse was never in the flesh. Maybe he was just... Yeah, I don't know what I'm saying. It's that funny thing, too, if he's built himself a pedestal, but he's asking you to kind of take him off of it at the same time.
Well, I mean, he literally takes himself off of it at the end, right? Like, it's over. Mm-hmm. He's demonstrating that none of this matters.
Yeah. That's still, like, I knew it was coming, but it's a gut punch. You're like, oh, you're actually going to do that. You're dead. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
But also inside of that doesn't feel like a mea culpa either, or it doesn't feel like I don't know, like a punishment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he goes out on top in his mind anyway, right?
Yeah, with a fabulous number.
Yeah, and everything else gets...
Heartbreaking, ridiculous.
Yeah, all the stuff he leaves behind is still there. His legacy is his work and all that, and that's certainly the case with Fosse. But Yeah, the body bag, just like the use of that and having the heart monitor in the background suddenly take over, or gradually then inextricably take over the rhythms of it. I remember this the first time, it's so abrupt. It's because there's no beauty in it. It's just an opaque bag being zipped up and just pushed off. And then that's where the image leaves us, and it's, oh, right, of course, there's nothing else. Like there's nothing else, and maybe the angel's not really there either. He might have hallucinated the whole thing, and then we're just alone with that thought for however long it takes the credits to roll. I wish I'd seen
And that final moment removes all the glamour. Like even in the mess of the entire film, even in his acknowledgement of his shortcomings or whatever, everything is still, there's a little bit of glamour to it. Like the sequence of him in the morning, it's like heartbreaking, but so it's glamorizes it in a way. It's so stylized and repeated, and you kind of grow this affection for it the more times you see it in the film, or at least I did. And then by the end you're just like, it's just a bag getting wheeled away.
Yeah. All the Visine in the world won't get you out of it. And he does, he denies, or rather Fosse denies the cliche of, live fast, die young, leave a good-looking corpse, right? Because he lives fast, but he didn't die like he's not young by the time we see him. And Scheider's playing, I think he's playing 10 years older than he really is, or he's just supposed to look 10 years older. The salt and pepper and the sense that like he's not, he's at a point now where the ritual of the morning and all the other stuff, he's trying to maintain this thing. He's not as real as he used to be, but he's still pushing it. And it's just, it's for nothing. And that's it too. Like Fosse's awareness of the character's vanity has to be a commentary, right? It has to be an acknowledgement that we're watching this movie pick the flaws apart and reveal just the guy who at the very end is vain enough that he smokes in the recovery room and refuses to stop. He's entertaining people in the hospital because he can't stop. And that's a pathology. And I think he knows it. And we're still ripped apart when his daughter begs him not to go. Like I come back to that every time, and it's so simple, and the way that Gideon doesn't even acknowledge it when it's happening. He's smiling at somebody else over her shoulder and talking to somebody else. Both Fosse and Scheider know what that moment means. They're showing us how hollow this guy is, and how much his work and his life is meant to himself, and how he can't even hear the people begging him to stay. And maybe it's supposed to be her voice in the hospital coming through, like a transmission, maybe. But I know that's there for a reason. Like I know that's there to make me realize what he's missing. And
well, he even like earlier in the film when he leaves the studio, he says like some father or something. Like I think he's aware of his effect. I think he sees the effects of his behavior playing out all in front of him, but he just can't get off that, hamster wheel of use. Yeah,
even if it's exactly as it happened for Fosse, like he made this movie, and that guarantees that we're still talking about him. We still watch it. Does that mean it was worth it? I don't know. My impulse is to say that all art lives the artist, and therefore the art is important. But he made some people really sad. Like that counts too.
I don't know. I think like this. I was thinking about that just in terms of who he was in the context of the time he was alive and the shenanigans he was getting up to, and the ripple effects of those shenanigans, and all of like other filmmakers at that time who were always up to that kind of stuff too. But that this is such an interesting example of like owning it, and not in a way that's like fuck you, I am who I am, take me or leave me, I'm messed up but whatever. Like that wasn't what it felt like to me. Like I don't know, I think it affects me so much because it's like somebody just owning themselves. I don't know. I can't quite find a way to articulate it properly, but
Yeah, I know
it's
what you
like
mean.
so full of ego, but yeah, but also humble in a way. Like that feels like a weird word to use for Fosse, but it's a bit of a humbling.
Yeah.
Like.
Well, you put it out there really nicely. It's a catalog of his failures, as he sees them, and so that speaks to the self-awareness that comes with, humility and self-awareness and understanding, and just even the fact that he knows enough not to lionize Joe. Like, he's not presenting this guy as an almighty conqueror, which, again, like, Beatty would have played the guy without a regret, without any sense of vulnerability or mortality. He was also, in 1979, he was like good 10 years, maybe 15 years too young for the role. But I guess, you cast Warren Beatty, you get your movie financed, so of course. It's not...
But even that, too, a younger man would have changed the whole thing.
Yeah, the energy would be different.
Him being that age was, I think, and him being at that point in his life, and I don't know, it's just you carry a different, I don't know.
Yeah, well, and Beatty...
reflective surfaces.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Beatty, too, would have been apologetic, because that was his thing, the aw shucks thing that he was doing right around that time, where he wouldn't... I'm about to say I couldn't see him as a director, even though I know him primarily as a filmmaker. I don't know that he could sell theater. His energy's all wrong.
Well, even like, I don't know, I think of Shampoo, like so much of that for me is him being like, it's almost like posing, like,
yeah.
Like he'll do the bit and then he'll turn and you can see behind his eyes, he's like, and this is my sexy face.
Yeah.
And like if that had come, totally. But if that had come into this world, I think it just would have,
Yeah.
And I agree, the theater and film energies, like, that's fascinating to me that they were able to meld those, like that Fosse could, I just believed it. Like it felt like home. That sounds messed up, but
I was going to say, of all the movies to be comforted by, this is not one I would suggest to people, but if it works, it works.
Yeah, I was never really, like a Cinderella kid.
Come home, throw on all that jazz, relax, enjoy.
Yeah. Get my juice box.
Yeah, it's an escape in its way.
Yeah.
So this is a weird segue, but the podcast usually closes with the question of what is it, if anything, that you've taken from, borrowed from, absorbed of all that jazz. And you are a physical performer, but I don't necessarily see any real clear links. Is there something else that you've used from Fosse down the line?
Yeah, I think for sure, like, it was the first clear example that I remember seeing that operated, like I said earlier, operated inside of boxes but also outside of them. That somebody looked at a form and was like, okay, here's how it's been done, and here's how I'm going to just like flip a couple of things to make it work for me, or to represent myself authentically inside of this space or whatever. So I think for me, when I think of Fosse, I think of somebody just trying to think of things a little differently, and also really honor their impulses. Like, some of the stuff that he does, even in his choreography, you're like, this is nuts. Like, this is a weird choice. And it's goofy too. Like, I think of Damn Yankees, the number he choreographed, specifically Gwen Verdon too, whatever Lola wants. That whole thing is so weird. Like, it's just unlike any representation of like a seduction that I've ever seen. So I don't know, just for me it's just like an affirmation of the inner weirdo. And also too, like, this movie specifically, just like walking with that darkness, like not in the stereotypical or like oft pulled on like broken actor, not that thing, but like right. Walking with all of life and all of whatever we don't know in one, and that's part of it, and you got to acknowledge it. The less that you can run from, the more that you can look at and be like, yeah, that's the thing I do, or the more that you can crawl inside and know all of the crap you've pulled, and the more you can own it, I think the more honest the things you end up making are. I think that about sums it up.
That's pretty good.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, while you were saying that, I was thinking the one thing I didn't really click on about Scheider's performance, and therefore the tone of the film, is that he is always the same. Like, Joe is always the same no matter where he is or who he's talking to, including death. Like, he's a little charming, he's a little pointy, he knows what he wants, and that's, I think that's how you handle that tone you were talking about, the sense that he treats the supernatural and or at least the out of body, whatever it is you call that, he treats that as exactly the same relationship he has with everybody else. Yeah. And maybe that's why it's so weird, because I don't think I've ever seen another movie that is that, where the tone is contained in one actor and the rest of the movie is changing wildly all the time.
Yeah. I think it's just like a good thing to watch, to be like, be you. And like we're not all operating on one plane. I don't know. That's a little woohoo maybe, but I believe it.
It's not the worst philosophy.
Yeah.
My thanks to Kacey Rohl, who is absolutely riveting in Calvin Thomas and Yona Lewis's White Lie, available today on digital and on demand. It's also available to rent at Digital TIFF Bell Lightbox. You should watch that. She's amazing in it, and it's basically Canada's version of Uncut Gems. You can find Kacey on Twitter at Kacey Cadoodles, KaceyKadoodles, and you can find all that jazz in an excellent special edition from the Criterion Collection. It seems to have vanished from every streaming platform, but if you're in Canada, it's streaming for free on the CTV website somehow. Also, of course Kacey was right, Nicole Fosse does appear in the movie, and she plays a role in the Chorus Line film as well. I guess I need to watch more musicals. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com, where I'm hosting a bunch of podcasts these days in addition to my film stuff. Go check that out. And you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, say so. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or wherever you've been enjoying this. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network. They're good. Stay inside, watch movies. Maybe stay away from movie theaters, though. I'll see you next week.